If you've ever watched a wrestler and thought, this is the next big thing, only to later realize it never quite happened, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because today, we're diving into those careers that felt destined for greatness, until something went wrong. Whether it was timing, bad booking, injuries, or just one moment that changed everything, these are the stories of wrestlers who came incredibly close to superstardom, but never fully got there. And by the end of this, you'll not only understand what happened, you might even find yourself wondering how different wrestling history could have been if things had just gone a little differently. In professional wrestling, potential can be a dangerous thing. Sometimes it builds expectations so high that even a solid career feels like a disappointment. And that's exactly where we begin. Test is one of those names that perfectly represents that feeling. Go back to the late 90s, during the height of the Attitude Era, when larger-than-life personalities dominated the scene and new stars were constantly emerging. In that environment, Test stood out almost immediately. He had the size, the look, and the kind of presence that made it easy to imagine him standing at the top of the company one day. It didn't take long for him to be placed in a major position either, joining the corporation alongside some of the biggest names in the industry. For a newcomer, that kind of exposure was rare, and it showed just how much faith the company had in him. Things only got bigger when he became part of a high-profile storyline involving Stephanie McMahon. That wasn't just a random angle, it was the kind of spotlight that could elevate someone overnight. For a while, it really did feel like Test was on his way. He was featured more prominently, given more screen time, and positioned in a way that suggested he was climbing fast. But that's where the cracks started to show. While Test looked like a star, the finer details weren't quite there. His mic work and emotional delivery didn't match the level required to stay in that spotlight, especially during a time when character work was everything. Once the storyline shifted focus and other performers took center stage, Test began to fade into the background. He still had a respectable career afterward, winning titles and staying relevant, but the trajectory had clearly changed. Instead of becoming a top-tier name, he settled into the role of a dependable mid-carder. And when his time with the company ended, it left behind a lingering question of what might have been if things had clicked just a little better at the right moment. Around that same period, another story was unfolding, but in a very different way. Steve Williams didn't arrive as an unproven talent. In fact, he came in with a reputation already built. Known as Dr. Death, he had established himself as a dominant force in other promotions, particularly with his hard-hitting, no-nonsense style. He wasn't someone being developed, he was someone expected to make an impact right away. There was a belief that he could step into a major role and immediately feel credible against top stars. That belief wasn't unfounded either. Williams had the kind of presence that made him feel dangerous, like someone who could realistically dominate opponents. But then came one of the most infamous decisions in wrestling history, the Brawl for All tournament. What was meant to add realism ended up doing the exact opposite. It exposed weaknesses, led to injuries, and damaged the aura of multiple wrestlers. For Steve Williams, it was devastating. After being knocked out, the intimidating image that had defined him was suddenly gone. In wrestling, perception is everything. Once that perception changes, it's incredibly difficult to recover. Plans that once included major feuds and high-profile matches disappeared almost instantly. Instead of being pushed as a threat, he was repositioned into lower-tier roles that didn't suit his strengths. Not long after, his run came to an end, leaving behind one of the clearest examples of how a single misstep, especially one outside a wrestler's control, can completely derail a career. Jason Jordan's story feels different, but it carries the same sense of frustration. From the beginning, he had everything companies look for in a modern wrestler. Athletic, technically skilled, and part of a highly successful tag team, he built strong momentum alongside Chad Gable as American Alpha. Their chemistry and in-ring ability made them stand out, especially in a division filled with talented teams. When they transitioned to the main roster, expectations were high. But instead of continuing that rise, they struggled to find consistent direction. Eventually, the team split, which led to a surprising twist, Jordan being revealed as Kurt Angle's son. That storyline instantly placed him in a much bigger spotlight. Suddenly, he wasn't just another wrestler, he was tied to a legend and given a clear path towards something bigger. It felt like the turning point he needed. And then, just as things were starting to come together, everything stopped. A serious neck injury ended his in-ring career far earlier than anyone expected. It wasn't a matter of losing momentum or being misused. It was simply bad timing in the worst way possible. Wade Barrett's rise had a completely different kind of energy. As the leader of Nexus, he burst onto the scene with a level of impact that's hard to replicate. The group's debut felt chaotic and unpredictable, and Barrett stood at the center of it all as a commanding presence. For a moment, it seemed obvious this was the next major star. Everything about his presentation pointed in that direction. But momentum in wrestling is fragile, and once it's disrupted, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. A key loss at a major event weakened Nexus significantly. What once felt dangerous suddenly felt less important. Barrett still had opportunities afterward, including a high-profile feud that could have solidified his position, but the execution didn't quite land the way it needed to. Over time, he transitioned into a solid performer in the mid-card scene, even reinventing himself successfully at points. But that early spark, the one that made it feel like he was destined for the top, never fully returned. Tom McGee's story almost feels like a wrestling myth. A single match created an illusion so powerful that it changed the way people saw him. With the right opponent guiding him, McGee looked incredible, so much so that it convinced decision-makers they had found the future of the company. But once that controlled environment was gone, reality became clear. Without someone to structure the match in a way that highlighted his strengths, his limitations became impossible to hide. What looked like natural talent was revealed to need much more development. It's a reminder that in wrestling, context matters. One great performance doesn't always tell the full story. Rusev's journey is one of the most frustrating for fans. From the moment he debuted, he had a strong presence and a clear identity. As a dominant, unstoppable force, he felt like someone who could easily move into the main event scene. But over time, that momentum faded. What makes his case so interesting is that he didn't just rely on one character. When given the chance, he adapted, reinventing himself in a way that connected even more with the audience. The Rusev Day phenomenon showed just how naturally he could engage with fans. Despite that connection, the push never fully came. He remained stuck in a position that didn't reflect his popularity. Even after leaving and finding success elsewhere, it only reinforced the idea that the potential had always been there, it just wasn't fully realized in the environment where it first appeared. Ryback's rise was explosive. Built as a dominant force with a simple but effective formula, he quickly gained attention. The undefeated streak, the intensity, the presentation, it all worked. But sometimes success comes too quickly. Being placed in a major title match before the timing was right created a situation where something had to give. When that streak ended, so did much of the momentum that made him feel special. From that point on, he never quite recaptured the same energy. He remained visible and even achieved some success, but the sense that he was on the verge of becoming something much bigger slowly disappeared. Maven's story highlights the risks of being pushed too early. Winning a reality show gave him a unique entry point, but it also meant he had to prove himself under a level of scrutiny most wrestlers never face so early. He had moments, especially one unforgettable elimination that shocked everyone, but consistency takes time. And in his case, that time just wasn't there. Being thrust into the spotlight before fully developing made it difficult to sustain momentum. Alex Riley's situation is one of those stories where perception behind the scenes seemed to play a major role. He had the look and the confidence, and there was a period where it felt like he might break out. But after a key moment didn't go the way it needed to, everything shifted. Opportunities became limited, and the momentum faded. Sometimes in wrestling, it only takes one decision, one opinion, to change the entire direction of a career. And finally, Monty Brown. A natural athlete with undeniable presence, he felt like someone built for stardom. Early on, everything pointed in the right direction. He was positioned near the top, given meaningful programs, and treated like a future main event player. But momentum can be difficult to maintain. Changes in direction slowed his rise, and just when it seemed like he might get another chance to reach the top, he stepped away from wrestling entirely for personal reasons. Unlike many others on this list, his story didn't fade, it stopped. And that's what makes it stand out. Not because he couldn't make it, but because we never truly got to see how far he could have gone. Looking at all these names, one thing becomes clear. Success in wrestling isn't just about talent. It's about timing, decisions, health, and sometimes pure luck. Every one of these wrestlers had something special. And for a moment, it felt like that something would take them all the way. But in the end, they became something else instead, reminders of how close greatness can be, and how easily it can slip away. So now I'm curious, which one of these stories stays with you the most?